You ever get that moment that freezes you in place? Not because something boisterous or crazed occurred, but because something subtle did, and it just didn't sit right. It began with a gas station, downtown Kansas, Sunday night, not somewhere anyone would give a second thought. But what occurred there to one woman in uniform? Well, it says more about the nation we inhabit than any article you read today. She wasn't making a scene. She wasn't doing anything illegal. She was exhausted, bone-weary, the kind that creeps down into your back after a hard day of actual work. That's all it was, a run-of-the-mill gas and water stop on the way home from base, and yet, within minutes, she was handcuffed on the ground, on American soil, wearing her military uniform. Now, I want to ask you something. What does it take, do you think, for a soldier, someone who spent more than a decade of her life in service, to be viewed not as a protector, but as a problem? It's the question at the center of this tale. It's not boisterous, it's not flashy, but it's serious, and it's heavy. Because for people of a certain age, particularly those of us who have lived through a few cycles of this nation's history, this moment rings a familiar bell. It evokes that old tension, the kind you feel in your chest, that in some circumstances, with some others looking on, it doesn't matter who you are or what you've done. Some people will only notice what they are expecting to notice, and what they got that night at the gas station wasn't a soldier with honor and discipline. It was something else. And that right there is the core of the story we're about to untangle. Now, I'm not here to yell, I'm not here to blame, but I am here to tell you the truth. Because when you hear what Sergeant Delilah Monroe suffered, when you get to walk the whole story, not just the headlines, you'll see why so many of us, young and old, veterans and civilians, stood up and said, "Enough." And perhaps you'll begin to ask the same quiet questions others have asked ever since. What does real respect look like? Who gets to feel safe in their own skin? And how much does a uniform actually cover for you when somebody's already made up their minds you don't belong? Now, I understand people from my generation and older. We grew up on a certain type of pride. Pride in service, pride in sacrifice. We stood at the anthem. We knew what that flag stood for. We still do. But even for us, this tale makes you think. Because if this can occur to a woman in full military uniform, calm, composed, doing nothing wrong, what does that tell us? And perhaps more importantly, where we're headed. This has nothing to do with politics, nothing to do with taking sides. It has to do with human dignity, with the sorts of quiet, insidious moments that don't make headlines until someone captures them. This one was captured, and let me tell you, it went far. But before the news story, before the hashtag, before the public outcry, there was only one woman alone, on her knees, on the chilly tile floor of a quick-trip convenience store. And no one in that room, not the clerk who summoned the police, not the officers who arrived, not even the teen boy recording it on his phone, had any clue what was about to go down. So I ask you to bear with me, because within the next few minutes, we're going to step through this moment. Not just what occurred, but why it resonated so deeply with so many people. We're going to speak about Sergeant Delilah Monroe. We're going to speak about assumptions, about silence, about what it feels like to be noticed, and what it costs when you are not. This is more than a viral video. It's not just a gas station anecdote. It's a reflection, a mirror, one that's making a lot of people, me included, do some hard, honest reflecting. So pour yourself a cup of coffee, get comfortable, because this story, well, it could linger with you longer than you think. Let's start. She was in full uniform on American soil. So why were they acting like they thought she was a criminal? Face down, hands behind your back, now! The voice sounded quick, loud, and far too close, almost as if it was inside her own head. Sergeant Delilah Monroe didn't protest. She didn't hurry either, not out of rebellion, but because her body simply wasn't up to speed. Her legs were weighted down from fatigue, her back hurt from wearing gear all day, and her heart, well, it was all wound up in turmoil. She was already kneeling, wedged against the icy tile floor of a quick trip in Topeka, Kansas. She just pulled over to get a bottle of water and fill up on gas on the way home from base. Her boots made faint impressions of dirt behind her, a reminder of a long day in the field training. Her uniform was dusty but crisp. Her name tag read Monroe. The American flag patch gleamed clean and stark on her right sleeve, and her Army insignia was perched directly above her heart, Kansas. She just pulled over to get a bottle of water and fill up on gas on the way home from base. Her boots made faint impressions of dirt behind her, a reminder of a long day in the field training. Her uniform was dusty but crisp. Her name tag read Monroe. The American flag patch gleamed clean and stark on her right sleeve, and her Army insignia was perched directly above her heart. None of that mattered, though. The officer didn't flinch. He pulled her arms around to the back and snapped cold metal around her wrists. "Why am I being handcuffed?" she said, her voice steady, quiet, calm. No reply. His companion waited in the background, hand on her holstered gun, eyes scanning the gas station as if it was enemy territory. Behind the glass wall of the shop, a teenage cashier stood stock still, mouth half astride, phone gripped tightly in his own hand. Delilah looked up and saw herself in one of those ceiling mirror panels. There she was, a black woman in uniform on the floor, being treated as a threat. She blushed, not with embarrassment, but with something more. Anger? Sadness? Perhaps both. Then a voice came from the direction of one of the aisles. "Hey, she's a soldier! What are y'all doing?" It was a female, likely mid-40s, dressed in medical scrubs and cradling a fountain drink. She stared back and forth at Delilah and the officers, a look of disbelief etched on her face. "She's actually in uniform. You're kidding me, right?" One of the officers bristled. "Ma'am, back away." Delilah said nothing. She wasn't going to lose her voice. She wasn't going to fight back either. That's how things like this get out of hand. She knew it had happened before. Nice people, polite people, who were pushed one step too far. Not today. Not to her. She used a steady tone. "My military identification is in my left front pocket. You may remove it." Still nothing. The officer merely stared at her as if she'd been speaking an alien language. Perhaps he had not heard her. No, he had. He simply did not care. She shut her eyes and breathed slowly. This was actually happening, in the middle of the day, in uniform, in the United States of America. But what would follow? No one, officer, bystander, or that goggle-eyed adolescent with a camera, saw that coming. 2 hours prior, Delilah Monroe was driving south on I-70. Her windows were slightly open, boots removed, music playing softly out of her phone. There was an old Alicia Keys song going through the speakers. It was shortly after 5 p.m. on a Sunday. Traffic was light, and while she was exhausted, it was the good kind of exhausted, the kind you get after a good day's work with people you can trust. Her hair was cinched into a tidy bun under her patrol cap. Her camo uniform still had that faint sweat and grassy smell. A full day, drills, equipment checks, stock runs, just standard Army fare, back at Fort Riley, 40 minutes or so north. She'd been on duty since morning, 14 hours straight. Straight through a long, grueling day, she didn't whine. Not once. She never really did. All Delilah Monroe needed was a bottle of water and a full tank of gasoline before she went home. Nothing flash. And that's why, when she saw the red and white luminosity of a Quick Trip sign just off the Fairlawn Road exit, she stopped. It appeared to be a standard roadside gas station, well lit, neat, with the barest scent of coffee wafting through the air. 2 vehicles were at the pumps. Everything seemed normal. No red flags. No cause to be on guard. She pushed out of her dirty SUV, arched her back, and inserted her debit card into the pump. "Prepaid only," the screen read. She sighed. That chip malfunctioning thing again? It had occurred previously. No big issue. With a small shrug, she walked toward the store, keys in hand, eyes cast down. As soon as she entered, a splash of cold air greeted her like a wall. The store was still, almost creepily so. No music, no background noise, just the gentle clinking of a slushy machine in the corner. Behind the counter was a man in his 50s or so, pale, tired-eyed, gray mustachioed, and wearing glasses that kept sliding too far down his nose. He did not smile, did not welcome her, just stared. Delilah smiled and nodded at him and ambled over to the coolers, picked up a bottle of water, and proceeded to the register. "Pump 3 on this," she told him, setting the bottle down. She reached into her pocket for her card. The man never took his eyes off her uniform. He took her from head to toe, from her boots to the name tag pinned to her chest, then lastly up to her face. There was a change in his expression. He appeared uncertain, as if he was attempting to solve a problem that he didn't want to acknowledge was even before him. "Active duty?" he queried. His tone was low, as if he didn't want anyone else to overhear. "Yeah, from Fort Riley," she replied. He said nothing in return, merely inspected the bottle and handed her the total. Delilah swiped her card. Declined, again with the chip. "I'll swipe," she told him, her voice light, reaching to slide the magnetic strip. But she could sense his eyes on her hands, watching her as if she was working with dynamite. That creeping feeling settled in, a shift in the atmosphere, unspoken but real. The kind of tension that you can't always put your finger on, but you sense when it's around. His look wasn't merely curious, it was suspicious, as if he was gauging her against something in his mind, and she wasn't measuring up. "You say you're active duty?" he repeated. Delilah hated repeating herself, but she didn't let it get to her. "Yes, sir. Logistics Officer, Sergeant Monroe." Nothing from him still. Just a slow nod that didn't say, "I believe you." It said, "I don't." She grabbed her receipt, nodded once more, and turned to walk back to her SUV. What she didn't notice was him slipping unnoticed into the back room. She didn't hear the phone ring, didn't have a clue that in 4 minutes, 2 police officers would screech into the parking lot as if breaking up a cartel sting. Because to her, it was simply a gas station, simply a bottle of water, just a detour on the way home. But to that man in back of the counter, something was not right with her, and that something was going to become a weapon. The phone rang 2 times before a dispatcher answered. "Police dispatch. What's your emergency?" The voice of the man came through steady, too steady. You could tell he was trying to make this sound more serious than it really was. "Yeah, this is Stan at the Quick Trip on Fairlawn. I've got a woman in here, claims she's military, full camo, boots and all, says she's active duty, but something don't feel right." The dispatcher asked the obvious. "Okay, sir. Is she threatening anyone?" No, she ain't said nothing crazy. Just something's off. I've seen a lot of real soldiers come through here. She don't look like the type." There it was, that word type. He hadn't said race. He didn't need to. The dispatcher requested a description. He provided it. "Black woman, perhaps early 30s. Uniform appears official, but you know, these people get their hands on anything these days." The dispatcher pushed again. "Has she threatened, made a scene, refused to pay, argued?" "No. She'd paid. She wasn't making a scene. But still, you never know." It was a slow day in Topeka. The call that went through to dispatch wasn't urgent, but it wasn't something they could wave off either. It was vague, but just enough to justify a quick check. So 2 patrol units were sent out, just to look around. That's all it takes. Back in the station, Stan hung up the phone and walked back to the front counter. He used a rag that was dirtier than clean to wipe it down, then stood there, waiting. His eyes flicked toward the parking lot every few seconds as if he was waiting for something to occur. Outside, Delilah had begun pumping gas. She was facing away from the building. She'd removed her cap and placed it on the dashboard carefully. The sun was setting behind the Quick Trip sign, casting long yellow shadows along the pavement. Stan watched her closely, still looking for something. Anything that would confirm the little story he'd built in his head. A younger man walked into the store wearing gym clothes. He noticed Stan staring through the window. "You good, man?" the guy asked. Stan just shrugged. "We'll see." Outside, Delilah clicked the nozzle back into position and screwed on the gas cap. She picked up her water bottle, drank a long swig, and leaned against the hood of her SUV. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. A group text from her crew. They were discussing picking up food later. She smiled, weary but satisfied. Then she heard it. Not loud but close, sirens. Two Topeka police cars came into the parking lot, driving in opposite directions. Their lights were on, but no sirens. Not yet. They didn't slow down into the parking lot. They rushed in. Delilah didn't blink at first. She thought perhaps there'd been an accident nearby, but then both cars braked in front of her, at an angle like they were blocking her path. That's when her demeanor shifted. Both doors opened. Two officers entered, one male, one female. Their hands were resting on their belts. The male officer spoke first. "Ma'am, place your hands where I can see them." Delilah blinked. "Sorry, we received a call," he added. "We just need to ask you a couple questions." She slowly raised her hands. One still clutched her water bottle. "What is it about?" she asked. "Your uniform," the female officer said, her tone a little more measured. "We need to verify you're not impersonating military personnel." Delilah stood tall, calm. "I'm Sergeant Delilah Monroe. Active duty, Fort Riley. I've got my military ID. It's in my front pocket." The male officer stepped closer. "Keep your hands up." "I'm not reaching," she said, still calm, still steady. He glanced at his partner. Inside the store, Stan watched with arms crossed, eyes narrowed. Delilah saw it. The flash of a moment the two officers glanced at one another. Not confusion, really. More of a hesitation. Like they weren't certain what sort of scenario they'd just entered into. But they were in it now, and they understood that. And that hesitation, it was just sufficient for everything to change. Delilah did not move. She'd been in far too many real-world situations to risk a sudden motion. She'd trained younger soldiers how to stay calm under pressure. But nothing in all that training had ever prepared her for this. Standing in uniform, on American soil with two police officers treating her like a suspect, simply for existing. "Turn around," the male officer said. "I'm telling you, my ID is in my—" "Ma'am, turn around now." She swallowed, hands still raised. "Look, I am not resisting. I am cooperating. But I want this on record. I am a current soldier, and I have the right to tell you who I am before you put hands on me." The female officer moved ever so slightly. She seemed unhappy, perhaps weighing whether or not to intervene or remain in harmony with her partner. But the male officer had already decided. He stepped forward, grabbed Delilah's wrists, and spun her around, harder than he needed to. "Hey, take it easy," Delilah said, not raising her voice. "I didn't do anything." "You'll have a chance to explain," he replied, "at the station." She froze. "For what?" Delilah's voice cracked. Just a little. Not from fear, from disbelief. Her head glanced in the direction of the gas station window. Inside, Stan remained frozen, standing there as if he were stuck, as if this was a film he'd watched previously. The click of the cuffs. Metal. Tight. Cold. Too tight. "Seriously?" A woman's voice called out nearby. It was the same lady from before. The teal scrubs one standing by her vehicle, drinking a beverage with one hand and holding her keys in the other. "She's in uniform! What the devil is wrong with y'all?" The officers remained silent. Delilah now kneeling, she closed her eyes. "May I speak to your supervisor?" she said, her voice firm. "You'll talk to someone at the station," the male officer said. Finally, the female officer took a step forward. "Let me check her ID," she said, reaching toward Delilah's left breast pocket. But her partner cut her off. "She's cuffed now. We'll sort it later." "Later?" Delilah snapped. "This is insane." More voices joined in now. Two teenagers by the vending machine had their phones out, filming. One leaned toward the other and whispered, "Get her name. Get the cops' names, too." Delilah sat back, spine straight, still composed, still trying to breathe through the moment. "I've served 2 tours," she said, mostly to herself. "I've led missions. I've delivered gear in combat zones. But this is what gets me cuffed?" The woman in scrubs shook her head, then raised her voice loud enough for everyone in the station to hear. This is what it's like when people like you are afraid of people like her." That finally got a reaction. The male officer spun around to her. "Ma'am, if you're not—" "Oh, I am involved. I just saw you handcuff a soldier for pumping gas." Delilah didn't protest. What was the use? Her mind turned inward. Her breathing, her posture, her voice. She'd been schooled for high-pressure situations. for chaos, for things going south in a hurry. This wasn't that. This was worse in some sense. Silent, affable humiliation under the open Kansas sky. One of the teens took a small step forward. His tone was gentle. "Want me to call someone for you?" Delilah nodded. "Yeah, my phone's on the front seat. The unlock code is 4379. Call my CO-Captain Dorsey. He's under favorites." The kid saluted her briefly and took off towards her SUV. The officers did not stop him. Perhaps they were still in their zone, trying to determine exactly what they were doing. Because here is the truth. They didn't know. They had a hunch, a prejudice, a phone call from a man who did not approve of her. And once they followed that, they had to keep moving, even when it ceased making any sort of sense. But when that adolescence call came through to Fort Riley, everything changed. Suddenly, Captain Dorsey wasn't the type of man who lost time. When he picked up his phone, and a trembling adolescent voice on the other end informed him Sergeant Monroe was cuffed at a gas station, he didn't query. He requested the address, then hung up. In a few minutes, 3 Fort Riley military police cars were speeding down I-70, flashing lights, no sirens, only that unmistakable sense of urgency, the kind that doesn't have to yell. Dorsey was driving the lead SUV. At the quick trip, Delilah was handcuffed on tile, her back against the soda machine. Her water bottle lay tipped over and was bleeding slowly across the floor. No one had cleaned it up. The teens continued to record. The woman in scrubs hadn't budged. A businessman type who'd come in to purchase gum stood in the doorway, frozen, eyes wide. He remained silent. He merely stared, attempting to comprehend what he was witnessing. At last, the woman officer knelt down next to Delilah. She reached into her pocket and produced her military ID. She examined it and gazed. The female officer glanced at Delilah's ID once more, then regarded her partner. She's legit." The male officer didn't answer. He simply gritted his jaw. Delilah didn't even look at him. She glared up at the ceiling, shaking her head slowly. "I already told you that 15 minutes ago." "You don't have to say another thing, ma'am," the woman in scrubs yelled out. "It's all on tape." Just then, the quick trip doors burst open. 3 men entered, 2 in complete military police uniforms, 1 in civilian clothes directly behind them. They set their sights on the room right away. Captain Dorsey followed, unruffled and composed, but decidedly not here to play games. "Sergeant Monroe?" His deep, firm voice cut through the air. Delilah raised her head. "Sir? What in the world is going on here?" The room went silent. The male officer began to talk, but Dorsey raised one finger. "Number, don't tell me about it." He faced Delilah. "Uncuff her. Now!" The silence grew heavy. "Sir, we had a report," the male officer started. Dorsey interrupted him. "You had a report. She was in uniform. She provided you ID, and you still handcuffed her." Delilah rubbed her wrists, finally having the cuffs removed. Already the skin was red and sore. Dorsey moved closer to her. "You okay, Sergeant?" "I'll be fine. Thanks for getting here." He nodded again, stiffly, then turned his full attention to the officers. "You can expect to hear from JAG. Mark my words." That did it to the older officer. "Look, we were just doing our job." "No, you weren't," Dorsey retorted, his tone glacial. "You were judge, jury, and uniform inspector on a phone call from a gas station attendant who didn't take a liking to the appearance of a black man in camo." No one protested. The kids were continuing to record. The video, already live, was over 12,000 hits and rising quickly, and it hadn't even gone on Twitter yet. Dorsey took one last look at the room. "Let's go, Sergeant." Delilah didn't utter a word as she trailed behind him. She didn't even look back. But her expression, it spoke volumes. Anger, exhaustion, and something more. Something deeper. Recognition. Because this wasn't the first time. It was just the first time that it had occurred in uniform. By the time Delilah made it to her SUV, the teen who had assisted her had already uploaded the video to TikTok. His caption was brief. "She flashed them her ID. They cuffed her anyway. This ain't right." An hour later, it reached 100,000 views. 10 minutes after that, it was on Twitter. A local news anchor found it and added, "This is Sergeant Delilah Monroe, active duty, arrested in uniform at a gas station in Topeka because someone felt off." The female in scrubs, Gloria Chambers, an RN at the local hospital, posted her own picture. It was of Delilah handcuffed on the ground. Her caption, "This is what being black in America looks like, even when you wear the uniform." Hashtags were trending by 9 p.m. Sergeant Monroe, your years yacht protect black. Women in uniform. Back at the gas station, the scene had already shifted. A younger cashier now stood behind the counter. Stan? Gone. Word was he clocked out early, right after someone from corporate called his cell phone. As for the officers, they were no longer at the scene either. Their cruisers had quietly been pulled out by a third unit. One officer was seen pacing in the precinct break room. The other sat alone in his car, scrolling through comments on the video. Every comment hit harder than the last. "This is what racism looks like. Fire them both. Imagine doing this to a white Marine in uniform. Sue them, sue the city, sue the gas station." In a small local diner across the street, the locals were already discussing it. One fellow drank his coffee and said, "Well, we don't know the whole story." But the waitress, a little black woman named Ariel, well, she had an opinion. Ariel shook her head. "We know enough," she said simply. "She told us who she was, produced her ID. Yeah, that should have been good enough." Another customer spoke up from his booth. "And if she'd yelled, if she'd stepped wrong, that tale could have gone a whole lot different." And back at her place, Delilah sat quietly on her couch, still in uniform, boots on, wrists still throbbing. She hadn't turned on the lights. She simply scrolled through her phone, post after post, her name everywhere, her face everywhere, her dignity now subject of public discourse. She didn't cry. She didn't comment. She didn't even post. Captain Dorsey had called before, informed her that the higher-ups were already on it, told her that he was proud of how she conducted herself, told her to rest. But rest is hard when your name is trending. For surviving something you never should have had to survive. But still, the momentum was growing. People were listening. And come morning, those at fault weren't going to be able to get away with silence anymore. At 8 a.m., the Topeka mayor had already made a formal statement. It was guarded, polished, full of the kind of language that read like, "currently under review," and "we take these issues seriously." But the people weren't swayed. Outside the Topeka Police Department, a protest had already begun. Not a huge crowd, perhaps 40 or 50 at the beginning, but constant and increasing. No shouting slogans, not yet. Just a row of individuals standing in the morning sun, signs held aloft, faces weary but intent. One sign stated, "Would you cuff her if she looked like your daughter?" Another, "Real soldiers don't have to prove themselves. Racists do." Inside the precinct, events began happening quickly. Internal Affairs had opened an official investigation by noon. The two officers implicated, Officer Clay Benson and Officer Rhonda McNeely, had both been put on administrative leave. The language was subtle, but the message was unmistakable. There was tape. There were witnesses. And Fort Riley had complained officially that very afternoon. That evening, Police Chief Leonard Garvey stood before City Hall for a press conference. No podium. No speechwriters needed. Just a line of reporters and a microphone. He seemed weary, like a man who hadn't slept in a while, which, to be fair, he hadn't. "I've reviewed the footage," he began. "I've spoken with Sergeant Monroe. I've spoken with her commanding officer. I've spoken with members of this community." He paused and took a breath. What happened at that gas station should not have happened. Cameras clicked. "I want to be very clear. Wearing a uniform, military or otherwise, should not be what determines how someone is treated. But the fact that even in uniform, Sergeant Monroe was treated as a threat first and a person second, that says a lot about how far we still have to go." He paused again, this time longer. "I've apologized to her personally, and now I do so publicly. And I want the people of Topeka to hear, accountability is on its way." No one cheered. No one yelled. People simply listened. Because this time, words weren't enough. The damage had already been inflicted. The video had gone viral. There were think pieces in every big outlet, hundreds of TikTok stitches, many from veterans across the board, saying the same thing. If she can get cuffed, we all can. As for Stan, the clerk at the gas station, corporate had already taken him out of his job. A brief statement followed. We do not condone bias or discriminatory behavior in any form. But sleuths on the internet went deeper. Someone uncovered Stan's earlier Facebook posts, and let's just say they didn't paint a pretty picture. Meanwhile, Delilah remained quiet. No interviews, no social media, no press, just silence. Delilah returned to work, just like she always did. Head held high, voice steady, sleeves rolled up, ready to serve. At Monday morning formation, her unit stood tall on the parade ground. Captain Dorsey nodded once. She doesn't need to say anything right now, he said. The world's already listening. Delilah gazed out at the soldiers around her. Black, white, brown, male, female, young, old, all of them tied together by service, and she thought about what it truly means to wear that uniform. In a nation that can view it and still view you as a problem. Something had shifted, not all of it, not nearly enough, but something. A week passed before Delilah made a public statement. She did not hurry. She owed no one a soundbite or a moment gone viral. But one quiet night, she sat in her tiny kitchen table. No uniform, no makeup, just a simple t-shirt and that very same calm, even voice she spoke in convoys, briefings, and, alas, when handcuffed. She opened her computer, clicked record, and began to speak. I didn't want to make this video, she started, but I think I have to. It was brief, perhaps 6 minutes. She outlined what occurred, the stop, the call, the cuffs. She did not seek sympathy. She did not seethe with anger. She simply sounded exhausted. I've served this nation for 12 years, she testified. I've never been arrested, never had to establish that I was anywhere. Until I was standing in uniform, in my own nation, purchasing a bottle of water. She paused. I don't want to be a hashtag. I don't want my name trending. I don't want applause. What I do wish is that people would just stop assuming that they know who somebody is based on how they look. Because if I'm a threat in uniform, what does that make me without it? She did not call the officers by name. She did not swear. She did not yell. She merely spoke the truth. I wasn't physically hurt, she said, but something did shatter. Only that thin veil of faith that perhaps, just perhaps, the job I do, the uniform I wear, the flag I salute, could be enough to shield me from being profiled. Turns out it isn't. Not always. Within the next day, her message had been watched more than 4 million times. Veterans all over America threaded her video with their own experiences. A retired Marine explained, she remained calm better than I would have. A Navy officer chimed in, this isn't a black issue. This is an accountability issue. Teachers showed the clip in classrooms. Politicians read from it in speeches. Even some police officers quietly posted about it online, with messages such as, we need to do better, and we know it. Delilah still didn't grant interviews. She didn't need to. She returned to work, quietly, proudly, still serving, still believing in the country, even if parts of it hadn't believed in her. Because that's who she is. Not a victim, not a symbol, a soldier, a woman, a human being. But here's the thing. Delilah doesn't need to be in a uniform to be respected. No one does. And until we change that, stories like hers will continue to happen. So here's the question we all have to ask ourselves. If respect is based on what someone wears, was it ever actually respect to begin with? If you think in terms of justice, of human decency, of the importance of accountability, don't just watch this video. Say something. Forward it. Call assumptions into question. Because genuine change doesn't begin with policy. It begins with people. People like you,